All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I'm here from the ACU Writing Center. I have worked in online education all the way back to when we used to send helicopters filled with DVDs out to aircraft carriers because the president deployed the ships to the Persian Gulf. I have been working for ACU for, let's see, about a year and a half now. And I came to ACU from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. Before that, I worked for Walden University in Minneapolis and Azusa Pacific University in Los Angeles. And one of the things that I love about doing this is that I get to work with students who are all over working on all sorts of interesting projects here. Speaking of which, I would love it if you could share in the chat room where you're joining us from and what program you're in, and if you're at that point, what you think you'll be working on for your doctoral dissertation or doctoral project, because I always like to use examples that are most relevant to the people here, and that just makes the material that much more helpful, and also more interesting because you see things that align with what you're doing. I have a couple questions that people have written to me. You can always send me a private message using the chat tool. Just go ahead and where it says to everyone, just change that to Basil Considine, and then I will get that message privately and I can answer it without showing who's asking it to the rest of the group. So if you're feeling a little shy, just send me a private message. So I had a couple people ask about how you narrow down what your dissertation topic will be. And that's a great question because you want it to be very specific. First, to be useful to what you're doing. And second, so that you create something that is concise, that you've established the boundaries. This is what we're doing. This is what we're not doing. So for example, we have several people in the latest cohort who are joining us in the EdD program and are specifically looking at post-secondary education leadership. And if you're doing that, you might start by looking at something like this job posting here that I'm sharing. And please let me know if you can't see my web browser share here, where this is a job for a school improvement position in Pennsylvania, near the Philadelphia area, so not too far from a major city. And let's look at what they are looking for. They say we want someone who is interested in making a positive impact, improving schools. We have the basic terms of employment, so you know what kind of job you're shooting for. And let's look at what they're asking. Well, they want experience being in a school leadership position, and I don't know anyone in our EdD program who isn't in one or hasn't been in one before, but experience using school improvement and implementation strategies and facilitating teams. So if you were looking at a job like this and saying, this is a job that I want, then one of the things you can do is shape your dissertation research so you are creating evidence of your having this experience, saying, oh, well, I'm interested in this phenomenon and school improvement, I can definitely work on a project that lays out a blueprint for implementing strategies and figures out how to facilitate improvement on a system level, which is what this rest of this job description has. And it talks about all the people that you want to be working with. And so you could start with a position like this and say, all right, this is the general kind of thing that I want to be able to do. What kind of research projects will give me that? What kind of intervention should I be working on creating my own theory here? Or do my interests in the kind of job I want to have next, is it more on the implementation side, in which case you craft a very different project and shape your literature search accordingly. Now, this is just one example, but it does really help figure out, here's what you want to do. In my own research, I knew I loved working on opera. Okay, that was easy. I knew that I loved being in the tropics, and I love tropical islands. And I happened to find a research topic that involved researching opera on tropical islands. That also it required that I go and observe music performances at the beach and go to all these parties where they're using the music so I could tell the difference between the commercial music, what people are actually doing. And so my dissertation was a joy to research. The writing, I won't tell you it was a joy per se because it took a long time, and anything like that at some point, you just want to be done with it. But I really loved the topic. And for what I wanted to do, that was exactly what I needed to be writing about. And so if you see opportunities for that alignment, go for it. And this goes as well for people who are early in their studies, where you see, oh, I have the opportunity to pick the exact topic for this class. If you have an idea, these are the kinds of things I want to be doing research on because I'm passionate about the topic and I think I might write my dissertation or craft my project about this, then take the opportunity. That will be work that will move you towards that goal. And that not recreating the wheel unnecessarily is a huge part of finishing your dissertation in a timely fashion. Most people who attend this webinar have been to our writing center services before, and I've also had a couple people say that they might have to leave early. So we're going to do a slightly expedited version today. We do have a lengthier recording, but I'll skip all the stuff about making an appointment. If you've RSVP'd for this webinar, you'll get a copy of the slides and links to all that stuff anyway. Coming up this term, we have in the next couple weeks, Introduction to Graduate Writing in APA Style this evening. It is a great refresher to do if you are preparing to submit a manuscript and you've been looking at it so long your eyes glaze over. This is a way to check, okay, yes, I have in fact been doing that right. Or, ooh, let me fix that before I turn it into my committee. Intro to APA on Thursday. On Saturday, 2 Saturdays from now, I am doing a paragraph writing in APA webinar, which if you get a manuscript back, so you say you sent in your proposal and you see a lot of comments about improving flow or saying the text is dense, that's a great one to watch because we talk about the structure of a paragraph to make a good argument and how to break up these large blocks of text. This is usually a problem in the lit review where there's just so much information, it can be tempting to try and group it all together in one paragraph because you see there is this larger organization. But with a few small tweaks, you make it much easier to read and guide your reader through it. So your committee says, uh-huh, 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 yep, got that, uh-huh, uh-huh, yep, that, which is exactly what you want. You want people to say that, okay, I see exactly what they're telling me and it's convincing, I agree, let's move on. And then writing a film analysis is probably not going to pertain to the people here, but it is one of our more popular webinars. So let's focus on the 2 learning objectives for today. First, understanding the concept proposal, which goes under many different names at different institutions. And you'll sometimes hear our faculty referring it by the name of their doctoral institution or the last place that they taught. And you find this kind of variation at universities everywhere. And we'll also talk about that reasonable scope thing that I was mentioning earlier. This is mostly a hands-on material thing where we are looking at specific examples of instructions related to coming up with your proposal and time permitting some examples that you can look at. So at this point, I'm going to change my screen sharing over here to go back to my web browser. So I have here one of the nursing classes that is designed to build you towards your final doctoral project. If you are working on the EdD program, the same idea applies, but the primary research question is not formulated in with quite the required formality. But it's still helpful to look at what the Pico question says. So Pico, if you're not familiar with it, is an acronym that outlines different components of a question where you establish the context and you state, all right, here's what I'm going to be doing. And it's got the 5 components, hence PICOT. And this is designed to be an iteration of after you have done some research writing, so doing some research about your topic, where you pick, okay, here's a specific question that I'm going to try and answer. You want your question to be specific because if it's open-ended, it's hard to know when you have actually established it. If your question is something like, what are the effects of this? Or what are the ongoing effects? Well, ongoing doesn't have an ending point. What are the effects? You could keep looking and finding more stuff. If you say something to the effect of, what are the implications or what are the effects of this as measured by this survey instrument? Well, then you have established we're going to use the survey instrument and interpret its results. But what we're going to fundamentally involve people are taking some sort of survey or assessment, and then you're going to analyze that. So here, and again, the basic principles hold true for EdD, even if the details are different. We have it laid out, okay, you're going to have those components you need, then determine what kind of design is most appropriate for answering that question. Identify the specific variables that you're tracking and what you think will influence it, and then how you will assess this. Now, not every project is going to lead to something where you've got nice, neat numerical data on it, and that's fine. But you do want to figure out what exactly you're trying to understand, assess, and or change. Anything that you're interested in changing, you want to be able to measure the before and after, or the effectiveness of it. So let's back up here, and I'm going to go ahead and we'll back up to the general assignments for this course and look at some of the things that take you there. So we have writing a problem statement. A problem statement is saying, okay, such and such a thing is an issue. Such and such a thing is a significant problem, significant meaning important enough that it's something that there's utility for answering. Like if I wrote a problem statement about the trees in my backyard, by itself, no one's interested in the trees in my backyard besides me, really. But if it's something about the trees in my backyard and, say, fighting Dutch elm disease, well, that's something of great potential economic interest to people around the country, because elm disease is a major killer of trees still. And so while the specific problem in that case might involve my backyard, the general problem is Dutch elm disease across the country. Now, I see we have a number of people here from the EdD program here. So I'm going to switch up my discussion and talk about some of those examples here. If there's someone here from the DMP program, please chime in and I'll know to switch back when we get to the next opportunity. But I do try and make sure that our examples match the interests and needs of the people who are here in the room. All right, so if you look at the Leadership 765 class, there's a final assignment, the final problem of practice paper, which is all about laying out the general and specific problem that you're going to investigate and hopefully try and change something about. In our EdD and DMP programs, you generally don't do what's called pure theory research. Usually you're not doing grounded theory where you try and create a theory to understand events. Usually it is action research where there's something you're trying to change. Say, this isn't working, let's make it work. And that could be that there's an implementation gap. People said to do this, but it's not happening. Why? And can we change that? And sometimes it's a case of, well, we're not sure what works for this specific situation. Either is fine and to address, and many other variations, but usually one of the purposes of a professional doctorate, like an EdD of a DNP, is to be able to lead or implement change. And so your committee will steer you towards projects like that. So let's look at the criteria here for this assignment. Should provide a clear description of the problem that prompts the study that is tied to a specific context, leadership concepts, and the student's program area specialization. So if you are here and you're on the organizational leadership track, then you're probably going to be looking at something that involves how can we make either this organization that I've chosen to study, which might be one you're working at, or a system-wide problem that you're seeing in the industry. How will you make that better? Or how will you lay the groundwork for someone else to make that better? Now, one of the issues that people get when expanding this to the concept proposal is that they find, oh, well, I wrote about this here, and I also wrote it in my literature review, and let me just put this all together. And then because these were written as separate papers, you end up having all this duplication of text, and also areas where, because these were written at different stages of research, where there's inconsistencies. And that's something you really want to try and proactively address, to go in and say, all right, let's make sure this is consistent, make sure I am writing questions that speak to the exact problem that I've laid out. Let me make sure that I am aligning these materials so that it's not going and not going and confusing the reader about what exactly you are doing. So let me bring up one more thing there, and then we'll move on to the next chunk. So you'll see here, final problem of practice. All right, that is leading us towards this dissertation prospectus. Now, I mentioned that there are different names for things that you will encounter, and this is true in some of the course materials as well as in the communications you'll have with your committee. I have worked at universities where they call the prospectus just a two-page proposal for your dissertation. I've worked at universities where they call the proposal that same two-page thing. At my own doctoral university, Boston University, they said prospectus, 2 pages, as mini proposal, 10 pages, full proposal, chapters 1 through 3. So in this class here, in Leadership 791, the end goal is to produce this 3-chapter draft called the prospectus. And for that prospectus, you need to have the approved concept proposal. Now, why am I talking about the prospectus now when the goal is to do the concept proposal? Because if you look at what the prospectus is going to be, you can see how you should be writing parts of the proposal. And also, one of the best ways to know what should go in the concept proposal is to look at a published dissertation and see, oh, here's what someone else did. And you understand that when it's turned in as a published dissertation, it will have past tense. Well, I did this. I recruited this many subjects. I implemented this. I administered this survey. When it's your concept proposal and when it's your prospectus, it's going to be future tense for that because you haven't done all those things just yet. All right, so let us look at the assignments for this. And you'll see, oh, okay, it's working incrementally, work on chunks, do an executive summary of what goes in chapter 1, submit a draft for chapter 2, revise those, and then eventually you get to chapter 3, the lit review. All right, but what do we need in these things? Well, so let's look at this Leadership 765 course here. I'm sorry, wrong one. Let's look at Leadership 791, pardon. There we go. So sorry, I did mean 765. So we have two related things here. but different approaches because it's a different size milestone. And if you're wondering what makes a good problem statement here, well, we do have some examples, but even better is if you go to ACU's Electronic Theses and Dissertations library here, where we have every published dissertation for the last several years, where you can just go ahead and download this directly. I'm going to go ahead and paste that in the chat window. I'm sorry, let me restart that share. Can you see my screen now? You should be able to see digitalcommons.acu.edu/etd open. Okay, great. Thank you for letting me know. Occasionally the share doesn't kick off and we just need to restart that. So we have here a number of sample dissertations here. And keep in mind, this is the finished product. Your concept proposal is basically laying out, here's what I'm going to do with the reasonable scope. Because of the people in this room, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to look at 2019. And we're going to go ahead and look for a leadership-based dissertation here. And let's see. Let's go with this. So this is a student I remember well. And this is like every dissertation, it's a process of the ideas that you have being narrowed down into a reasonably sized project for you to complete, where the scope and scale is both something that's important, but also something that you can finish here. So you'll see that it mentions that 267 faculty were assessed. Now that may sound like a lot, but they were using a cross-sectional survey. So not interviewing. Interviewing 267 people would require a massive team and more time than you'd probably want to be spending on it. But if you're administering a survey and you have access to a pool that large, you don't care if you email 500 people and 250 of them don't respond. You still got 250 then. So choosing a way of collecting data where you're able to understand the problem can be a great way of finding a reasonably sized, reasonably concise project to do. So all of these theses and dissertations are available for download. You don't need to have any special permissions. You don't need to have a password even. You can go ahead and browse those. And increasingly, you can do this for other universities as well. Let's go ahead and look at the abstract here, because this lays out the main things that we're interested for boundaries. So this is geographically bounded Christian higher education in the United States. The United States, that's the geography. Not looking at Canada, not looking at Mexico, not looking at Europe. In Christian higher education, which is a lot more narrow than, say, looking at public universities or just higher education in general. So those are some boundaries that help collapse what you need to look at in terms of research. We have a statement: the study was designed to determine if faculty organizational identification influenced the correlations of the variables. Meaning, how does one particular variable being tracked, or one set of variables, their organizational identification, does it lead to any interesting trends with the rest of the things being tracked? And so this is a kind of thing where people fill the surveys, and it's going to take you the same time to do the analysis, regardless of how many people are in here, because the math that happens behind the scenes, no big deal. It's the reading it, interpreting it that you'll be spending most of your time on. And we'll see, oh, one of the reasons they were able to get so many people is that they were looking at 5 faith-based universities. 5 is a good sample. If you had 2, it'd be very easy to attribute differences to otherwise minor differences between the institutions. But 5 gives you a sense of this isn't something that's narrowed just down to 1, because you see, oh, these ones have these commonalities, and then this result does or doesn't happen. And we'll see that they're reporting it as, oh, here's something they found with a statistically significant positive association. something that they looked at that did not turn out to have a meaningful correlation with one thing, but did with another. And then one of their outputs was they proposed a model for understanding what was going on. And that's great. If you were looking at something akin to the job that we were discussing at the start, that's this one here, and you said, all right, I want to be able to understand and propose a way of improving things that is grounded in previous research, much as this example is grounded in open systems theory, but this model is something that's specifically developed for this context. And that's good because you have an idea of what you're trying to find out on the other side, and thus you can and shape a lot of other things towards that end. So let's go ahead and we're going to look at the organization of chapter 1, because this is an area where people working on the concept proposal often go awry with not recognizing that this is supposed to be highly specific sections that are doing very particular things, and you don't need to talk about things that belong in another section. So if we go to the start of this, we'll see that there is a paragraph of background context saying organizational change is happening. And then we have another paragraph that says, so interpersonal conflict tends to happen when there's organizational change. All right. And then we have a statement of intent. I sought to assess the possible correlation between faculty interpersonal conflict and frequent or second order organizational change within the context of Christian higher education. So our researcher here has drawn a box around saying they're looking at frequent or second order organizational change. If it's third order, not interested, out of scope. That's great because that collapses the number of things they need to talk about in the lit review and means they don't need to collect certain types of data. Now we have some context here. You can see this as an extended background section. Often when the concept proposal is expanded into a full 3 chapters, this is the kind of section that goes in where your committee says, great, but give us more detail. And so you add what's essentially an extended background section here, where there are more numbers, talks about, oh, what are the other types of schools there are? What are the pressures that are leading to these changes? Not things that you need to know to understand the conceptual problem, but when you're starting zero and okay, here's why we did doing this specific thing, it's good to know, which is why this often gets added when you go from the concept proposal to the full-on 3-chapter draft. This is on the longer side, which isn't bad. If it's needed, it's needed. But you'll see that there's a lot of information in here that could potentially go in the lit review. Now, if you're wondering why they are looking at these specific cases, well, let's see here. They give some illustrating examples of the change you're talking about: Ohio Wesleyan, Marygrove College, ACU, and Emmanuel College, which I like because I used to walk by there all the time when I lived in the Boston area. Cute campus. And here we have the problem statement. Now this is the section that the length varies considerably because some problems just need more explanation than others. In the concept proposal, this is usually going to be a 1 or 2 substantive paragraphs laying out the general problem and the specific problem. The specific problem is the aspect of the general problem that you have chosen to address, and the flow is better if you identify them using those words. Otherwise, it can be hard for your reader to see when you change from giving background context to when you specifically lay out, okay, here's the problem being addressed. Now, if you use the word problem in that section, great. That makes it very easy to see that part. If you don't, it doesn't mean your committee won't approve it, but it does make it harder for them to say yes because they have to hunt around. All right, purpose of the study. This is the other part of the concept proposal that usually gets people. It's usually the laying out what exactly you're trying to address, the problem, and laying out what part about it you're trying to change that give people the most trouble. The other sections, background, usually people can write for days and days on that, and hopefully you won't be sticking to the essential background. And then the other side, the research question, if you've laid out your problem well, and then the purpose, then the research question is pretty easy to do. If you have trouble with that, I'm certainly welcome to make it an appointment with the Writing Center. I have people coming in all the time to brainstorm about their research questions and how to refine their problem statement. Now, I did promise that we would do a shorter session here because some people need to get back as soon as back to the rest of their lives as soon as the lunch break is over. So I'm going to jump to the research question here and the hypotheses. Not every dissertation and needs to have written out hypotheses, although it's helpful because then it controls how you are looking at the data that you get. Because oh, I'm specifically trying to find out this thing. Is this happening or is this not? What we do absolutely want to make sure you have are clear research questions. And let's differentiate between the research questions, which are big picture things you're trying to answer, and things like survey and interview questions, which are what you are asking the people directly. So if you come in with a list of 12 research questions in your concept proposal, your faculty will probably send that back with a comment saying, this is too much. And are you sure you want to have the whole study be designed to answer this? And also, if it comes and it's just a simple yes, no answer, that's usually not a very interesting question to be answering. Okay, so let me just see what's going on in the chat room because I see a couple people wrote in. Okay, question about the archive here. So the electronic theses and dissertations and database here, the digital commons, this is what we call open access scholarship, meaning it is open to the public without charge. I finished my PhD right when there was a change in federal funding guidelines to push for open access. So if you are working on some research and you're hoping to turn it into a journal article or a book immediately or in the near future, you can request basically that your dissertation not be published publicly until a certain amount of time has passed. I don't remember offhand what ACU's policy there is now. At BU, they now let you, withhold your dissertation for up to 2 years, so you can work on getting your research into publication as a journal article or as a book. But most people nowadays just choose to make it available immediately because you've done all this work on it. It's nice if other people use it, and even nicer when they use it and credit you and you get to see your name being held there. And I have had students come back and say, hey, you know what? I am using this in my application for tenure or in my file. The dissertations page, that's the link I pasted earlier. I'm going to go ahead and paste that again. That's the digitalcommons.acu.edu/etd. And if you just do a Google search for Abilene Christian University dissertations, it's one of the first things that comes up. And actually, if you're wondering, do people read these? Well, Dina graduated back in September of last year. And on the right-hand side here, you can see it's had 131 downloads since it was published on the web on October 8th. And it's nice to know that people are reading it. It's not the be-all end-all, but at the end of the day, as I say, other people thought this was also interesting. And even at our most recent thing here, you can see William Kyle is a recent graduate of our program, His dissertation was only posted in January 13th of this year, and it's already had 67 downloads. So what some people do is, because they know who is grading their doctoral concept proposal, and they have some idea of who's going to be on their committee, they'll go and they'll do a little bit of research and look and see, okay, what did these people's last student who graduate have? And let me go ahead and use that as a model for, what kind of length they saw as acceptable and everything. So if you go here, we'll see, oh, chapter 1 was only 12 pages. Okay, if you can do a good chapter in 12 pages, awesome. Research questions, they had 2. What is the nature of communication used to disseminate vision to constituents across a Christian higher education institution's campus? All right. And that's not a yes/no thing. That's probably going to be a descriptive list. And then, how does institutional vision impact the work of personnel at various levels? And this could be multiple sub-answers because they've laid out 3 different levels, and there can be more than one impact or types of impact. So I like this one as an example to discuss because it does fit many of the parameters that I was talking about. I worked with Brian on this. I usually work with almost every student in our EdD program when it comes to their dissertation. And we can see, all right, there's one paragraph for statement of the problem that lays out, oh, there's this link that's known. However, there's a problem, a lack of clarity. Zeroes in on religious colleges and universities having this issue, says, okay, and there's evidence. Studies have found that this can be problematic. Here's an example. And here's another example with 3 different people finding that there are issues here. So this is the general problem. And then the way that this student chose to approach their specific problem was to invoke their own professional experience, which is why they say, I set out on this path of research as a result of my own line of questioning, meaning in his own working activities, he found that he was encountering these issues. And then there's more detail on that. We're not seeing footnotes because he's referencing his professional experience here, and he's made that clear. And says, okay, so here are some unanswered questions that are causing problems because we don't have clear answers to them. And that leads into their purpose statement here, which is 4 paragraphs. It's around a page and a half in length, which is perfectly fine. And says, okay, so the purpose is to examine this phenomenon with a purpose in mind so that leaders can be provided with insight. That's a different focus than if you are making your concept about rank and file. This is not trying to change everyone, it's trying to change a small group of people. And you can look at it, well, what will they need? Well, they're probably going to want data. And probably rather than just getting theoretical perspective, they probably want to have specific recommendations. Do this, don't do the other thing, so on and so forth. So this is probably a good time to start wrapping it up because I just saw a couple people leave saying they have to get back to the rest of their stuff. So I have a little time in case anyone has some questions. I'm going to start wrapping up this part of the discussion, but if you have a question, just type it in and I'll try and get to that before we end. So the purpose section in the concept proposal and in this larger document, it's very helpful to establish who you are trying to make these changes with. And so we see that comparing 2 cases of 2 institutions that have something in common. They're both located in the same general region. All right. And they are ones that self-identify as Christian institutions. All right. And while some of this might be moved into a different section or expanded on greater in chapter 3, having it here actually helps us understand why the purpose is so narrow, because I'm trying to really gather data from things that have in common with the problem that was being described, the problem that the student observed in their professional work. So you had a question about accessing the recording. So if you registered for this webinar, which is to say, if you RSVP'd using our online form, you will automatically get one when it posts. If you're not registered, you can either send me your email address, or if you just reply to the email that went out to students saying, hey, there's this webinar, and say, could I get the recording? Then we'll just send you a link to it. And you can always send me a link directly at send me a request directly at the email address I just typed in. Okay, so there are some things here that you might wonder, why is that in here now? Well, if we look at the end of this paragraph, we say, I interviewed a total of 36 individuals between both case study institutions in order to assess their perception. You might think, shouldn't that be in chapter 3? Well, this is text that probably in the concept proposal was worded something like, I will interview about this number of people because that will give me the information I need, or so instead I need that in. And so when they updated that text to reflect what they actually did, they put in the numbers and changed it to past tense. That's why that's there. Okay. Let me talk a little bit about the research questions, and then we will end. So research questions here. If your question is very long, probably you want to break it up. You might have a question that is followed by a sentence with follow-up details about explaining the context. You might have explanatory sentences about the analysis that you'll use to do that. But the question itself, you want to be something reasonably concise. If it's more than 3 lines of text, start looking at it to see, do you need all that information exactly there? So we're going to end there. Thank you very much for coming. I should mention we do have a recording of another presentation of this where we looked at a different set of examples and took different questions from people. So you can find that on the Writing Center website. And this recording, again, if you send me an email or you RSVP'd for this, you can get a recording and a copy of the slide deck, no problem. Have a good day, everyone.